So he succeeded on paying the expeditions with the money of the Order of Christ. And when the style flourished, together with the motives related to the sea and the boats, they used the cross of Christ, the emblem.
As soon as she's done filming you, I'm going to borrow you.
Sure, you want to be
Can you take a picture? Yeah.
in there? Alrighty.
Is that all right?
Yeah, right
You're
there.
right.
Yeah, she got.
Oh, you weren't really ready, I don't think.
Oh.
Okay. Something like that.
May 1905. The paintings that you see on the ceiling are still the original ones from the time when this was a horse riding school. The balcony is still the original one from where the royal family and court used to watch the horse shows that were performed here on special occasions. This way. Nowadays, as you see, with many portraits of Portuguese kings and queens. It's on the left-hand side that you can see the oldest carriage of the collection. This collection is very important due to the variety concerning the nationalities, because there are not just Portuguese carriages, but also Spanish, French, Italian, Austrian and English carriages, and carriages from different centuries. This is the oldest one, dating back to late 16th century. This carriage was used according to the tradition by the Spanish King Philip II. As I told you, he came in 1508, invaded Portugal with his troops, conquered Portugal. So this was the vehicle used by the king to travel all the way from Madrid to Lisbon. Maybe you never thought that carriages were invented, so they were made for the first time in the 16th century. Sometimes in the 16th century in a small town in Hungary called Kutz, K-U-T-Z. This one dates back to 1580. It's very valuable, not just because it is the oldest of the collection, but one of the first vehicles ever made. Still very primitive on its construction. Notice that the front wheels are as large as the rear wheels. There is no steering wheel, no table wheel. It was difficult to make a closed turn with this carriage. Notice that there is no seat for the coachman, which is the small box that was used to keep some of the belongings of the king. The carriage was pulled by 4 horses. The coachman used to sit on one of the first horses. They used to drive. Many were Roman roads, very bumping. So they used to go very slowly, and when the carriage was being used, as they were always footmen, people walking along, the steps were removed. There are 2 large steps, but they were removed when the carriage was being used. Notice that the suspension system consists on the use of small leather straps in front and at the rear. And the carriage has glass, as you see. Carriages always had glass. It's not the original one in most of them. They are very old. The glass was broken, so it was replaced. But according to the records, they always had glass. Notice that the decoration shows leather and nail heads. But that is a characteristic of the decoration of Spanish carriages throughout the centuries. They used to cover the carriage with leather, the wood with leather, and they'll use small nail heads as motives of decoration. So the oldest vehicle is Spanish, dating back to 1580.
Leather suspension.
Construction of the carriages. Both carriages are almost 100 years. Built in Lisbon in 1750, and it belonged to King Joseph I, the king ruling at the time of the earthquake of 1755. The other one belonged to a princess, daughter of the king. That vehicle is known as the Cinderella carriage. And you know, carriages were very expensive. They used to exchange them as gifts, and some carriage built to be used just once on a very special occasion. That vehicle was used just once on the wedding ceremony of the princess, daughter of King Joseph I. Carriages are made of wood, oak wood, above all oak wood. They weigh about 1 ton, 1 ton and a half. When they were used for a short distance, they were just pulled by 2 horses. When they were used to travel a long distance, they were pulled by 4 horses. When they were used on a special occasion, such as a wedding or some other special event, a gala parade, the queen's carriage was pulled by 4 horses and the king's carriage by 8 horses. They always traveled separately, the king and queen. Even when the king was moving from one city to the other, the queen, the children, ladies in waiting, most of the court moved a few days ahead, and the king was the last one to arrive in a city. Always the last one. So that everybody could turn his attention, or their attentions to the king. Just by selling what Vasco da Gama brought back from India, King Manuel made 60 times the money he had invested in the expedition. So the expedition of Vasco da Gama was really a success. King Manuel immediately organized another expedition, and in 1500 the navigator Cabral, Pedro Álvares Cabral, set sail from the beach that existed here in front of the museum. In those days there was no museum, but the beach was there. Nowadays there is the museum and no beach anymore. Anyway, Cabral set sail from here, and on his way to India, Cabral discovered Brazil. Brazil was discovered in 1500 by the Portuguese navigator Cabral. Brazil was colonized by the Portuguese throughout the second half of the 16th century and throughout the 17th century. And late 17th century, when King John V was ruling Portugal, they discovered in Brazil big mines of gold and precious stones. They started to exploit the gold, the diamonds, the emeralds, the rubies, and they started to pay to King John V 1/5 of all the gold and precious stones exploited there. So King John V became as rich as King Manuel was rich before. King Manuel became rich due to the trade of spices. King John V became very rich due to the taxes collected upon the gold and precious stones exploited in Brazil. That means that he could afford to marry a lady who was a member of one of the most important European families in those days, the Habsburg family. Mary Anne of Austria, the sister of the Emperor of Austria, came to Portugal, married King John V, and became Queen of Portugal. She brought along with her several carriages, and this is one of them. This is considered a good exemplar of an early 18th century Austrian carriage. So, John V, Mary Anne of Austria were the parents of Joseph I, the king ruling at the time of the earthquake. We see on the wall a small portrait of a man wearing a long white wig. See the one on the left there? That is the portrait of King John V. Next to it, a bigger portrait, that's the portrait of Joseph I, his son. But John V was so rich that he could afford to have this crown carriage made in Paris. This carriage is French, but not from the 17th century, such as the other two that I pointed you out. This is from the beginning of the 18th century. This vehicle was made in Paris, shipped to Portugal, and used by the king just once on his wedding ceremony. He was so rich that he probably had a new suit made for the occasion, and also a carriage, you see? At the far end of the room that we find a group of Italian carriages. We are still in the beginning of the 18th century, at the reign of King John V. King John loved Italian art, and so he founded and supported a school in Rome for Portuguese artists. Once he thought on sending an embassy with gifts to the Pope, and it was not appropriated to send his ambassadors on horseback. such a rich king to send his ambassadors on horseback. It was not very appropriate because, after all,